The story itself is probable; it is the treatment that makes it unreal. In attempting to paint the dark pagan devotion of the father as distant from the ecstatic and Christian devotion of the mother, Dickens was painting something that was really there. This is no wild theme like the wanderings of Nell's grandfather or the marriage of Gride. A man of Dombey's type would love his son as he loves Paul. He would neglect his daughter as he neglects Florence. And yet we feel the utter unreality of it all, the utter reality of monsters like Stiggins or Mantalini. Dickens could only work in his own way, and that way was the wild way. We may almost say this, that he could only make his characters probable if he was allowed to make them impossible. Give him license to say and do anything, that he could create beings as vivid as our own aunts and uncles. Keep him to likelihood, and he could not tell the plainest tale so as to make it seem likely. The story of Pickwick is credible, though it is not possible. The story of Florence Dombey is incredible, although it is true. An excellent example can be found in the same story. Major Bagstock is a grotesque, and yet he contains touch after touch of Dickens' quiet and sane observation of things as they are. He was always most accurate when he was most fantastic. Dombey and Florence are perfectly reasonable, but we simply know that they do not exist. The Major is mountainously exaggerated, but we all feel that we have met him at Brighton. Nor is the rationale of the paradox difficult to see. Dickens exaggerated when he had found a real truth to exaggerate. It is a deadly error, an error at the back of much of the false placidity of our politics, to suppose that lies are told with excess and luxuriance, and truths told with modesty and restraint. Some of the most frantic lies on the face of life are told with modesty and restraint, for the simple reason that only modesty and restraint will save them. Many official declarations are just as dignified as Mr. Dombey, because they are just as fictitious. On the other hand, the man who has found a truth dances about like a boy who has found a shilling. He breaks into extravagances as the Christian churches broke into gargoyles. In one sense, truth alone can be exaggerated; nothing else can stand the strain. The outrageous Bagstock is a glowing and glaring exaggeration of a thing we have all seen in life, the worst and most dangerous of all its hypocrisies. For the worst and most dangerous hypocrite is not he who affects unpopular virtue, but he who affects popular vice. The jolly fellow of the saloon bar and the race course is the real deceiver of mankind. He is misled more than any false prophet, and his victims cry to him out of hell. The excellence of the Bagstock conception can best be seen if we compare it with the much weaker and more improbable knavery of Pecksniff. It would not be worth a man's while with any worldly object to pretend to be a holy and high-minded architect. The world does not admire holy and high-minded architects. The world does admire rough and tough old army men who swear at waiters and wink at women. Major Bagstock is simply the perfect prophecy of that decadent jingoism which corrupted England of late years. England has been duped, not by the cant of goodness, but by the cant of badness. It has been fascinated by a quite fictitious cynicism, and reached that last and strangest of all impostures, in which the mask is as repulsive as the face. Dombey and Son provides us with yet another instance of this general fact in Dickens. He could only get to the most solemn emotions adequately if he got to them through the grotesque. He could only, so to speak, really get into the inner chamber by coming down the chimney. Like his own most lovable lunatic in Nicholas Nickleby, a good example is such a character as Toots. Toots is what none of Dickens' dignified characters are in the most serious sense, a true lover. He is the twin of Romeo. He has a passion, humility, self-knowledge. a mind lifted into all magnanimous thoughts, everything that goes with the best kind of romantic love. His excellence in the art of love can only be expressed by the somewhat violent expression that he is as good a lover as Walter Gay is a bad one. Florence surely deserved her father's scorn if she could prefer Gay to Toots. It is neither a joke nor any kind of exaggeration to say that in the vacillation of Toots Dickens not only came nearer to the psychology of true love than he ever came anywhere else, but nearer than anyone else ever came. To ask for the loved one, and then not to dare cross the threshold; to be invited by her, to long to accept, and then to lie in order to decline. These are the funny things that Mr. Toots did, and that every honest man who yells with laughter at him has done also. For the moment, however, I can only mention this matter as a pendant case, to be the case of Major Bagstock, an example of the way in which Dickens had to be ridiculous in order to begin to be true. His characters that begin solemn and futile, his characters that begin frivolous and solemn in the best sense. His foolish figures are not only more entertaining than his serious figures, they are also much more serious. The Marchioness is not only much more laughable than Little Nell, she is also much more of all that Little Nell was meant to be, much more really devoted, pathetic, and brave. Dick Swiveller is not only a much funnier fellow than Kit, he is also a much more genuine fellow, being free from that slight strain of meekness or the snobbishness of the respectable poor which the wise and perfect Chuckster wisely and perfectly perceived in Kit. Susan Nipper is not only more of a comic character than Florence, she is more of a heroine than Florence any day of the week. In Our Mutual Friend we do not, for some reason or another, feel really very much excited about the fall or rescue of Lizzie Hexam. She seems too romantic to be really pathetic. But we do feel excited about the rescue of Miss Podsnap, because she is, like Toots, a holy fool; because her pink nose and pink elbows and candid outcry and open indecent affections do convey to us a sense of innocence; because her pink nose and pink elbows and candid outcry and open indecent affections do convey to us a sense of innocence, helpless among human dragons, of Andromeda tied naked to a rock. Dickens had to make a character humorous before he could make it human. It was the only way he knew, and he ought to have always adhered to it. Whether he knew it or not, the only two really touching figures in Martin Chuzzlewit are the Misses Pecksniff. Of the things he tried to treat unsmilingly and grandly we can all make game to our heart's content, but when once he has laughed at a thing, it is sacred for ever. Dombey, however, means first and foremost the finale of the early Dickens. It is difficult to say exactly in what it is that we perceive that the old crudity ends here and does not reappear in David Copperfield or in any of the novels after it. But so it certainly is. In detached scenes, and in characters indeed, Dickens kept up his farcical note almost or quite to the end. But this is the last farce, this is the last work in which a farcical license is tacitly claimed, a farcical note struck to start with. And in a sense his next novel may be called his first novel. But the growth of this great novel, David Copperfield, is a thing very interesting, but at the same time very dark, for it is a growth in the soul. We have seen that Dickens' mind was in stir of change, that he was dreaming of art and even of realism. Hugely delighted as he invariably was with his own books, he was humble enough to be ambitious. He was even humble enough to be envious. In the matter of art, for instance, in the narrow sense of arrangement and proportion in fictitious things, he began to be conscious of his deficiency and even, in a stormy sort of way, ashamed of it. He tried to gain completeness even while raging at any one who called him incomplete. And in this matter of artistic construction his ambition and his success too grew steadily up to the instant of his death. The end finds him attempting things that are at the opposite pole to the frank formlessness of Pickwick.